Okay, greetings everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to St. John the Wilderness for this evening with the Sisters of the Community of St. Mary. And we've got some folks here in person, so welcome to you guys. Thank you for joining us for dinner. And we've got some folks with us online as well. Thank you for joining us online. We're really excited about tonight's presentation as we continue to delve into the Benedictine life and the spirituality that's there. That dates back, a good 1,400 years. You can claim a little longer, 1,800 years even, to the desert mothers and fathers of the church. So we should do a little test here. This is Sister Elizabeth. Sister Elizabeth, can you say hello?
Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yep, we can hear you there. I think you sounded pretty good.
Okay.
We'll let you know if we can't hear you and if we need you to speak up at all.
Okay.
So Sister Elizabeth is going to talk with us a little bit about the rule of St. Benedict regarding humility and what it looks like to enter into this communal life where you're sharing richly in Christian community with one another. You're really spending time with other followers of Jesus, and how at the center of that is this need to constantly be reminded of what humility looks like, both as a gift given to us from Christ and as one that's lived out in that context. So we'd love to hear from you about that, Sister Elizabeth, and we'd love to also hear where you're from and how long you've been in vocation.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to you. And if you're joining us on Zoom, we do ask that you mute yourself. Make sure you stay muted. I'm going to actually mute our side too, so that it's a little bit easier for them, and we'll have to just take a second to unmute when the time comes.
Great. And do not hesitate if you need me to speak up. I still must say I am amazed that I could be in Tennessee and join you in North Carolina, where when I was in South Dakota yesterday, it still amazes me, but it is wonderful to be here. Believe it or not, I was in Flat Rock in the 1980s. I had it's a pretty good date, had a date to see our town at the Flat Rock Playhouse. And then later I came back to Flat Rock with a group of friends just to explore the Carl Sandburg historical, I think, site that it is. And then I think, as I do believe my family has a house over in Cedar Mountain. And I do believe that I have come by St. Rock John's in the Wilderness. And I remember the church up on a hill with a graveyard beside it. And I felt that I was introduced, Sister Madeline Mary brought back your March newsletter. And I really felt like I was introduced to the church with that. It was wonderful. I think what impressed me was not only what was happening in the church. I love the idea of the book club, I think that was happening, the adult ed that is happening, the holy hikes. But I also was impressed with your outreach to the people around you, with the mission house, with the backpack thing going out. To me, it's what church is about. A little bit about who I am. I'm Sister Elizabeth. When I joined the community in 1990, they encouraged me. I could have picked another name, but they said, if you want to keep your baptismal name, you are choosing to live out your baptismal vows in community. You're not becoming a new person. So I decided I'd been Betsy. Most of my life was my nickname, but I went to my baptismal name, Elizabeth, and became Sister Elizabeth. Dad is a Tar Heel. Mom is a refugee from Vienna. And I have a brother at this point who has a house over in Cedar Mountain. I met Father Josh, believe it or not, at a radical hospitality, which is what Sister Hannah talked about last week. Rosanna, I think, was in the middle of med school and was working in an emergency room, but Father Josh and I were there. And his mother came to visit him several times while he was in seminary, and she came and worshiped with us. So she and I connected. And I remember walks and hikes and praying together with your mom, Father Josh. Grew up in the Episcopal Church. I think I remember at the age of 7, I went to an Episcopal school, or just sitting in the pew and just a real awareness of God. I've had a good experience with God and with the church. In high school, I was introduced to the charismatic movement, which was something new for me. And also was, at that point, this was in the early 70s, people would come up to you and ask, have you been converted? Have you turned your life over to Jesus? And I could not name a date or a time. And so it was a time where I was questioning, do I really have a relationship with God? I had never talked about it much. So in college, I learned to talk about my faith, to pray extemporaneously, to read the Bible, and different kinds of Bible study. And at the age of 36, I'm 68 now, at 36, I'd been thinking since the age of 7, I think I'd like to be a sister when I grow up. I decided to give it a try. And at the age of 41, I made my life profession. And I told my nieces and nephews, that I think they were between the ages of 3 and 12 when I made my life profession. But I said, I can't think of a better way to spend the rest of my life. And I still, despite the ups and downs, it's a good fit for me. And thank you for inviting us to be part of your Lenten journey. I really enjoyed, I'm a word person, I really enjoyed looking at your newsletter, and I liked what Father Josh was saying, is that Lent gives us, he said, a grace-filled restructuring of our lives. It's an invitation to kind of, for 40 days, to restructure your daily life. I think some of the practices or some of the things that I have tried during Lent over the years have just been for that period of time. Other times, I think some practices that we try during Lent, it's because we want it to become part of our lives after Lent. I was amazed. My nephew, who grew up Roman Catholic, and I don't think he goes to church much now that he's an adult. He's 29, except when he visits his parents. But it was the Lent season last year. He told me, I saw him in October. He said, Aunt Betsy, he said, I decided my drinking was getting out of hand and I just was not making good choices. So I gave up drinking for Lent. And that this season, and he said, now I'm making better choices. Lent can be here for various reasons. I read Sister Madeleine Mary's sermon, and she said, Lent doesn't need to be a curse. It's a blessing. And it's a time of discernment. And I like it's who and whose we are. It's a time to think about who and whose we are. And then you have to realize, when I was younger, they didn't have Christian ed for the adults. You went to Sunday school when I was a kid. I'd go to Sunday school and all the adults would be in church. So now that there's Christian ed for adults, I was delighted to see that the ASCUs for the next, I think they began last Sunday, for the next 4 Sundays in Lent, are looking at our lives as a pilgrimage. They said it can be a series, our life could be a series of pilgrimages that lead us closer to God. And I loved it said, and God gives us an invitation to step forward. I find these metaphors do help me in my life. So you have the ASCU saying, hey, imagine life as a pilgrimage, and God's inviting us to step forward. What Benedict does is he gives us the idea. He says, imagine humility. He calls it the ladder of humility. But he says you have two sides of this ladder. And one of the things he said, one is your body and one is your soul, okay? And then you have the rungs going up. And he said there's no, in life, in Christian life, a life of faith, the body and the soul are not separate. They're, you're both body and soul, and both of them are part of your pilgrimage through life. He does not, he says we have our mind and our gut. We use our mind, but there's also that Holy Spirit that you get, the gut feeling, I need to do this. He talks about, as he deals with his monks, or the rule of Benedict, he says, there's a sacred, what we call sacred, and the secular, but it's all part of life. In the way that the altar guild washes the sacred vessel, and you're really careful, we should do the same with the cleanup crew in the kitchen. So that's one of the things I think that I have found really helpful, is to not try to separate myself in life. And Benedict, living by Benedictine rule, helps us, is the wholeness of life, no dualism. And what he does, and what I'm going to do, the three of us here said we'll kind of divide up the talks, and you're going to see me for 2 weeks, because today I'm just going to talk a little bit. I call it the H word. I think sometimes the word humility, I will say, it's not used as much now, and sometimes, to me, it's a word to explore. And we're going to explore tonight the word and look at what it is, what it isn't, just some ideas of what does it mean as a Christian to be humble. And then next week, when I'm with you, we'll look at, Benedict has 12 rungs, kind of 12 steps up the ladder. And he gives his monks some practical advice, gives not only his monks, gives anyone some practical advice on how to become more humble, achieve humility. I'll read you from the rule. He says, we climb by the humility of this present life. The ladder erected is our life on earth, and if we humble our hearts, the Lord will raise it to heaven. But Benedict also says, you're going to go up a couple rungs maybe one day, or one chapter in my life, one part of the path, and then you'll go down. That's part of being human. So you may go up, do some things. I mean, one of the things, as we get into it next week, Benedict talks a lot about words. And for example, take laughter. I mean, when I've had a good laugh, laughing with someone, that has been humble. They are that. But when I'm laughing at someone, I'm going back down the ladder. Silence can be great. We sit in the chapel a lot in silence, and that can be a step or two up the ladder. But if during the silence I'm sitting there mad at someone and kind of fuming at them, even though you can't see it, that doesn't help me, doesn't help them. So I go back down the ladder. So we're going to talk about some of those specific things next week it's been interesting, and Father Josh invited us. It seems 30 years ago when I entered into the community, and I still think that it is very, very helpful, the Celtic tradition. When I came in and was being formed, Celtic Christianity was very much part of my formation. Even though I'm a Benedictine, I think at that time, our community and maybe the world was really understanding that we are called to care for all the earth. And so that was emphasized a lot by the Celts and a lot in my Benedictine community. Now I think, and I really believe that many people are finding also the Benedictine rule of life. Madeline Mary gave you the history on it, but it is practical. It's daily life. It gives you more balance. I mean, part of his rule was to get enough sleep, you know. Part of the rule, you know, was to slow down. And so I think that some of the things that people are looking back at this Benedictine rule are finding, hey, this is not just for people who work for the church or for monastics, but there's some things in the Benedictine rule that can help me as I go out each day to work if I'm retired. And now that I've studied a little bit, the word humility, that is the word they use. Maybe I have garbage with it before. I'll say what humility is not. And when I first hear that word, I don't think of myself, oh, that's something I want to be. But now that I've studied it and looked at what Benedict means by it, it would be a compliment to be called humble. But what humility is not, one, and I go look at the Bible, it doesn't mean that I'm going to sit on Jesus's right hand or left hand when I get up to heaven. James and John tried that. They came up to Jesus and said, one time their mother came up, can we sit at your left and your right hand up in heaven? So humility is not getting a reward like that. Humility is not eating humble pie. I have to look at eating, you know, I've done something wrong, so I'm going to have to take the consequences, and I feel about this big. You know, humility is not about humiliation. It's not beating your breast and saying, hey, I'm a terrible person. And it's not, and this is a definition, it's not about being either better than someone or worse than someone. I think sometimes I put myself above people. Other times I put myself below people. And that is not what being humble is not humility. If I were describing in terms of looking at what Benedict, looking at what, I didn't know you could Google biblical humility, but looking at where they do look in the Bible, look at when Jesus calls, he calls us to be humble. What does that mean? I think it means modest, confident, strong, secure, quiet, and speaking up when you need to. The Bible dictionary says it's a way of acting toward God and toward others. And I found this a fascinating idea, that humility can be getting your confidence from God. I think if you think about sometimes what how you think of yourself, I think sometimes we put ourselves down. Sometimes, we're, I think probably now more in 2022, a lot of people don't. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me now? I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you. Go right
Okay.
ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for doing that. Joan Chittister, Roman Catholic Benedictine, and an author called, I read it, Humility is a Lost Virtue. She said it really is the glue of our relationships with each other, with God, and with ourselves. Go into the next page. I think I'd mentioned I'm a word person. I do like words. And so as I started looking at humility and realizing we're talking about biblical humility, or what did Jesus, it's a Lenten season. We're trying to restructure our lives, look at who and whose we are. I went to our library, picked up that concordance, and want to see where in the Bible does it mention humility. And I had forgotten, it didn't come right to my mind. There are a couple places in the Old Testament. Anyone remember the one from Micah? But we even have, if there are any in the choir there, we even have a hymn that goes with this verse. But Micah chapter 6:8, and I'm going to give you a handout on that, but says, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Hymn 605, one of my favorites, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. So even our Jewish brothers and sisters were hearing that word humble. Proverbs 22:4 said the reward for humility and the fear of the Lord is riches, honor, and life. Now, I'm not preaching the prosperity gospel, so maybe we'd say the riches, of knowing God, but that there's a reward for being humble. I mean, it makes me feel good. We get into what does Jesus teach us about humility. There are a couple parables, and since this is year C, the year of Luke, there are a couple parables that he uses the word humble. And Sarah ran off some sheets, but you'll see that in Luke 14, and I got it marked, it says, when he noticed Jesus had been invited out to eat. Now, I hope this, and it said, when he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable in 14. When you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, don't sit down at the place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited. Sit at the lower place, and then they may say to you, move higher. He said, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. The other parable he told was when they went to the temple, and that was in the Pharisee and the tax collector. And the same words, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And there is I think it's pretty wonderful hymn about Christ Jesus in Philippians 2, where it said, and being found in human form, Christ humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. So you have God teaching us in both Old and New Testament the importance of humility. But by the time we get to, when the church was beginning, the first letter of Peter, the 5th chapter said, all of you must clothe yourselves with humility in your dealings with one another. God gives grace to the humble. And so again, that idea that it is about our relationships with each other. It's about that glue of relationships. I noticed in the bulletin you're using right one. I kind of like when we switch right two, right one. Sometimes when I'm preaching, I'll look at, I don't know if you're familiar with the translation, The Message. It's a kind of a paraphrase of the Bible. But I think it is good. I need something to sometimes jolt me for looking at something a different way. And so pulled out my prayer book and listen on Sunday, because you all are using Right One this Sunday, aren't you? I mean, this season, aren't you? During is you'll hear, we humbly confess our sins. We humbly repent. And those of you who grew up in the Episcopal Church, the prayer of humble access. And that's when either you love it or you don't like it or you hate it. Some are so glad to see it gone and Right Two. Others are so excited to have it back. We do not presume to come to this side table, oh Lord. There's that. And then in the hymnal I was sharing that there's a hymn about St. Joseph. That's his day's coming up on Saturday. And it talks about he was a humble saint. Hymn 605, what does the Lord require? Do justly, love kindness, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. And then today is St. Patrick's Day. And I think when we get into next week, one of the things that that Benedict says, it's important to let God be God and to let humans be human. And I will say, Patrick, I did not know him personally, but I would not automatically say, hey, that's a humble man. But I do think his zeal and his passion for God in the definition Benedict gives, I think that we could call him a humble man. I want to read a little bit because I have found when I was at a really difficult point in my life, and I believed in God, but life I had no peace. It felt more like it was hard to get up each day, but it was looking at people who knew how to live lives, who life wasn't easy. Sometimes around them, things were hard. They might be sick. Maybe someone had died in their family, but they had that freedom that Christ offers us. And I do think as I've started preparing, as I've studied this humility, I do think as we grow in whether it's meekness and the image of God, in humility and confidence, you see people and you say, hey, they have something that I want. And I think it's when we see the image of God in them. So I want to read you a little bit about St. Joseph. We're remembering him on Saturday. The church remembers him. And I heard this, I don't know if you're familiar with Herbert O'Driscoll. He was, he probably still Anglican priest in Canada, wrote a lot in the 20th century. But what he did is he would imagine, here he is somewhere in the 20th century, 1990s or whatever, and he runs into St. Joseph at a coffee shop, and he describes him. And I want to just give you an idea of this. To him is an idea of a humble man, a humble saint. He said, I looked across the cafeteria tables and saw him. And then he sits down and he just says, this is Joseph. And he said the first thing he wanted to do was set the record straight about his age. I don't know of a single portrait of me in any art gallery in the world where I'm not completely senile, he complained, laughing. Believe me, I looked at every one of them. There I am, heavy beard, bent over, shuffling around, trying to keep up. How do you think I supported my family? Every day I wrestled with big pieces of wood, sawed them, lifted them, hung doors, and so on. How do they think I weathered a long, hard journey down the coast road across the northern Sinai when we had to get out quickly and run for safety only days after the baby was born. Do you remember when we lost him on that visit to Jerusalem? We were 3 days out. Know what that means? It means we had to go down over the Roman road down by the Wadi Kelt into the Jericho plain. Have any idea what it means to climb back a second time? You do that only if you're young and hardy and healthy. And then he said, Herbert O'Driscoll said, I asked Joseph about the early days. And he said, actually, Matthew got it right. You remember he begins his book by describing how I felt when she told me she was pregnant. I was devastated. Put yourself in my place. In the world you live in, these things can be understood much more easily, but it was different for us. The consequences could have been horrendous, especially for her. I was so appalled I couldn't speak to her for days. I couldn't work. I even closed up the shop. I went off and swore at God. Anyone who heard me, and I took care nobody did in those hills, would have thought I was going crazy. In a sense, it was. I loved her so much, and in the end, that was all that made the difference. I pushed him a little. Was it that simple? Well, yes or no, Joseph replied. I guess it was a dream I had the second or third night out. Something or someone came to me and said that everything was going to be all right, that her child was going to be, well, different, special somehow. I don't exactly know how to say it, but in this dream, I was being told to name the child. It wasn't enough for him to arrive into Mary's arms. I had to stretch mine out too. And I think for me, I want to share that with you because I do think humility, as Benedict offers it to us, as I think about it in 2022, humility is not sitting by and doing nothing or not always following it, the rules. I see with Joseph, I think in humility, you embrace your humanness. You're not better, you're not worse than anyone else. Joseph says, there were times I wanted to scream at God, and also I think part of humility is he was willing to change his mind. Sometimes, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I get myself, I'm following the rules, but I don't have that. One of the things we'll talk about next week that Benedict suggests is, that to be open, don't hold on to the rules so much, but be open to the mystery of God, the changing your mind. I think I love what the Ask You said, you're walking the path. You're doing your pilgrimage through life, and then maybe there's a way to the left or a way to the right. I think, hey, I want to explore that. And you do. And I started thinking, as I was using their image, as I was preparing the talk, and then I thought, and if you have Benedict's image of the ladder, now you have these rope courses, you might even climb up the ladder a little bit, get a better look at the view. But I think, as I heard this about Joseph, it made me realize that he was, well, one, his love for Mary, but also his love for God is what I think made the humility. I think he was confident. I think we got it wrong. I think, when we picture him as an old man and demure, I think, I won't say wrong, but I just think this gave me another perspective. And that there is, he probably wasn't an old man, because there were some things that he did and he helped to raise his child. And I'm going to end with one thing before questions. I think the thing, and what I want to talk about next week is, and we'll work towards the H word, but he also said, in this. So one of the things that meant a lot to him, he said, this is imagination, but he said, when I realized that Jesus had such a good relationship with God the Father, he said, I think I may have had something to do with that because I was his father. And I think that it's something we can work towards during this Lent, not just this Lent, during our lives. Humility is one thing. Kindness is something I see in many of the yards around here. Be kind, just that awareness. Michael Curry has talked to us a lot about being loving. But I think being aware of these virtues and maybe some little things we can do in our lives to become kinder, more loving, more humble, help. I'm going to, one more thing, and then I'll take a couple questions. Joan Chittister said as a Benedictine, what she has learned in her life is how to live an ordinary life extraordinarily well. And I like that use of words, most of us live ordinary lives, but I think by following Jesus, by growing more into the image of God, that we can live our lives extraordinarily well. And I'm sure that many of you there, as I looked at the pictures in the newsletter, and as I heard about the things you're doing, I think as a church, you're living and loving extraordinarily well, extraordinarily well. So I will end with that and take a couple questions if we have time, and if not.
Thank you so much, Sister Elizabeth. That's you really got us thinking about humility and how how this, as you said, quoting Jesus, the path towards knowing God and kind of experiencing the fullness of life that God has. That sort of being lifted heavenward is about actually being able to be humbled and to go the other direction. Actually, that we feel so inclined to go. So I'd love to see if anyone online or in person has questions. If you're online, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question as we think about humility and maybe how that plays out in the Benedictine context. And if you're here, you can come on up and you're welcome to ask a question. Just come right up here and stand here and take a moment.
I have a question. So I think you alluded to this a little bit towards the end when you were speaking about how St. John lives and loves as a community. But do you see humility more as an individual thing to work towards, or some work towards as a community, or both?
I think in Benedict that his focus is on what you can do as an individual. But I do think that it does affect a family. It's interesting. I'll give you an example. We have 2 meetings a week. And we also have recreation and movie night. And so one of the things Benedict does talk about is, how you use your words. And we sometimes tend to, you have 4 grown women living together. And when I came in, we had 8. I mean, strong women. We had to set down some guidelines, together, one speaks at a time. The idea we're brainstorming, no one is wrong. So I think you'll discover next week, a lot of it is individual in terms of what I can do. But when you're in a group or in a family or in a church, that it does affect the whole group. And one of the other things Benedict says, and is that you always should listen to the youngest person in the community because they may have some wisdom. And I remember when I came in, and I mean, everyone was old enough to be my mother or grandmother. But one of the older priests said, if you have something you need to say, it may be, I was kind of afraid to talk, but you need to listen to that urge, and just trust that's how a family works. And so I think what I'm giving you is, and next week will be some more individual things you can do, but I think you will find whether work, church, family, it will affect that. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Father Josh?
Marty, go right ahead.
Well, Sister Elizabeth, first of all, I would like to thank you for talking about the altar guild and then the people in the kitchen, because they are fully saints and we couldn't get along without them. I think of my sainted mother, who was a wonderful cook and cateress, but she always worked in the church kitchen without any thanks or anything. And sometimes I said, we need to thank, we do need to thank those who do that wonderful kitchen work and serving God. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Marty, that's such a great point to say. I think about when I was first moved here and I was getting to know parishioners, and I had lunch or something with Star Teal, and he said, well, I found that you find God in the dish pit. And this is a local restaurant owner, Elizabeth, who's done a lot of kitchen work in his life. So he said, I found God in the dish pit over the years. And that is that humility you're talking about, Marty, that Sister Elizabeth mentioned, where in those acts of kind of humble service, we realize that actually we're doing the very thing that God made us to do. And it's not glamorous, is it? It's, but it's profound. And it's that finding that's, you said, Elizabeth, finding the sacred in the secular. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Elizabeth? Any more?
I'm going to give you an assignment. I asked Sarah if I could, but another, I have these people. I was introduced to Herbert O'Driscoll, and another person I was introduced, I have several authors, is Frederick Buechner. And I think one of your handouts is on it. Y'all have that? And those who don't have it, Sarah can email it to you. But he gives a thought about Lent. And I think Madam Mary said, we look at who we are and whose we are. And I'm going to read just the first paragraph, but you can take it home. But it says that for Christians to observe, in many cultures, there's an ancient custom of giving 1/10 of each year's income to some holy use. For Christians to observe the 40 days of Lent is to do the same thing with roughly 1/10 of each year's days. Jesus went off alone into the wilderness, asking himself the question what it meant to be Jesus. During Lent, Christians are supposed to ask one way or another what it means to be themselves. And then he gives some ideas of some questions you could ask yourself. And so I'm just going to suggest, as you go, before we meet next week, is look at these questions or something else. Now, I learned in the Episcopal Church, all may, some should, none must. But I thought when we get back together next week before we start, just if there's something as you've thought about this week, who am I? Who am I? Whether it's, and I think the main thing is we're human. There have been some times I've stuck my foot in my mouth, but something that you'd like to share with the group. We'll just take the first 10 minutes of our meeting next week, say a little bit something about who you are, that you want to share with other people. It have to be like just a sentence or two. And then we'll look at the 12 rungs on the ladder, the 12 steps of some suggestions that I think will help us see whose we are. Because what Benedict is suggesting, and they're just, as I say, a lot has, you'll find a lot has to do with words and silence and relationships with each other. But if we want to try to lead a life where we are growing into the image of God, and he's talking, it's making this world a better place. You know, it's about life here on earth. He gives us some good advice. So enjoy. It's hard. I mean, I took one of those questions the other day, and the hardest part, you know, what do you most deplore in yourself? You know, I mean, some of them are hard, some of them are fun. Don't have to do all of them, but that's just something I have found helpful.
Okay, so you were saying to our homework assignment, if I understand it,
Yes.
is to spend a little bit of time with this Lent by Frederick Buechner, and to come back with having reflected on the questions here, who we are.
Yeah. If during Lent I'm supposed to ask one way or another what it means to be me, what it means to be myself.
Cool. That's good. Okay. Well, that I love homework assignments for. I love it. It's good. It's good. So this is a great challenge, and we'll take you up on that.
Well, don't have Sarah tell you why I gave a reason that you're kind of like with the homework assignment. Well, I don't have it all done yet because of our puppy, didn't I, Sarah? This morning I had two things for her, but one, my excuse was the puppy.
Oh boy, very good. All right.
A valid excuse.
What's that?
A valid excuse.
Oh. Indeed. All right. Well, Sister Elizabeth, I want to say thank you for getting us thinking about humility this Lent, and we're looking forward to next week being back here at the same time and same place. Reminder to everyone to register for the meal by Tuesday. That way we can get the amount of food correct and have that ready for us. Let's see, evening prayers at 6, dinner's at 6:30, and then our program is at 7. And when we pray an evening prayer, we're praying at the same time as Sister Elizabeth, who's praying at 5 Central Time. Most importantly, to live into the lesson of humility, Lent Madness, our bracket challenge. I'm still winning. So I've got 8 out of 11 correct so far, but Betsy Tibbs and Jeff and Seuss Gunter and Debbie Staten have 7 out of 11. And George Grisenda has 6 out of 11.
But what if we didn't vote ahead of time?
Well, if you don't play, you can't win. So
I'm playing.
And I will say that I might have missed the pretty important one. So this could get interesting. So thanks for sharing in that. Again, thanks for being here, everyone, in person and online. And we'll look forward to making this available via our YouTube channel as well. So go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you so much, Sarah, for helping.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Elizabeth.
You're welcome. And Betty, I enjoy those kids.